"What did you just do to my sons, Abigail?" Pedro's roar shook the marble walls of Breaker's mansion as his twin boys sobbed helplessly, never knowing this very moment would change all their lives forever. The morning sun stretched its golden fingers across Newport Harbor, spilling warmth onto the stony facade of Breaker's mansion. Inside, silence lingered, broken only by the sound of shoes clicking down polished hallways. Pedro Jacobs walked briskly toward his study, phone pressed tightly against his ear, issuing orders to subordinates who clung to his every word. A titan in finance, he commanded respect wherever he went, yet inside this sprawling mansion, he felt like a guest in his own life. Every room reminded him of loss. His late wife's laughter once echoed here, wrapping every corner in comfort. Now, only stillness remained. Pedro poured energy into building his empire, acquiring companies, expanding influence, climbing higher. Yet the higher he climbed, the emptier he felt when returning home. His sons, Ben and Jerry, barely 9 years old, carried that emptiness too. They were mirror images of each other, with sandy brown hair and wide, questioning eyes. Their mother's warmth had vanished too soon, leaving a void that no amount of toys, vacations, or indulgence could replace. In their short lives, they had already learned the ache of abandonment, compounded each time another nanny came and went. Pedro had fired 10 caregivers in less than a month. Some quit voluntarily, unable to manage the twins' emotional outbursts. Others were dismissed after clashing with Pedro's impossible standards. He told himself he was protecting his children. In reality, fear guided him. Fear of entrusting fragile hearts to strangers, fear that someone might fail them again. That afternoon, as the clock struck 3, Abigail Hill entered Breaker's mansion for her first official day. She wore a crisp uniform, posture firm, gaze unwavering. Unlike previous hires who approached with tentative smiles, Abigail radiated authority. Her presence alone silenced idle chatter among staff. She was not there to beg for approval, she was there to do a job. Yet beneath her iron exterior lived scars. Abigail had grown up in Providence, raised by a grandmother after being abandoned herself. Struggles had shaped her resilience. She believed discipline created safety, structure birthed trust, and honesty, however painful, protected children better than hollow sweetness ever could. When she stepped into the kitchen and saw Ben and Jerry arguing over spilled juice, she didn't reach for comforting words. She knelt, locked eyes with them, and said sharply, "Respect begins with responsibility. If you make a mess, you fix it. No excuses." The twins froze. They had never been addressed so directly. Their lower lips trembled, but something about her firmness carried an undercurrent of care they couldn't yet decipher. For the first time, they didn't throw tantrums. They fetched paper towels and cleaned together. Upstairs, Pedro observed through a security feed, narrowing his eyes. He wasn't sure what to think. Was she too harsh, or was this exactly the type of structure his boys needed? That night, as Abigail tucked the twins into bed, Jerry whispered, "Are you going to leave like the others?" She paused, heart aching at the vulnerability in his tone. Leaning closer, she replied quietly, "Not if you let me stay." Outside their door, Pedro listened unknowingly, torn between skepticism and curiosity. For years, he had controlled every detail of his business empire. Yet within these walls, he couldn't control the unraveling of his family. Something about Abigail unsettled him, perhaps because she didn't seem afraid of him or his wealth. As the mansion settled into silence, storm clouds gathered over the Atlantic. And somewhere deep inside Pedro Jacobs, a tension he could no longer suppress warned him. This woman, Abigail Hill, would not just change his household, she would change him. The storm rolled in quickly that evening, drumming rain against the tall windows of Breaker's mansion. Abigail had gathered the twins in the playroom, determined to establish order. The boys, restless after a day confined indoors, darted around with toy airplanes, their laughter echoing like sparks of rebellion. "Enough running," Abigail commanded, voice stern. "It's time for homework." Ben groaned, tossing his toy onto the floor. Jerry folded his arms defiantly. "We don't do homework when it rains." Abigail's eyes sharpened. Discipline doesn't take days off. Sit down. The twins refused, giggling louder, testing limits the way children often do. But when Jerry shoved a lamp accidentally, sending it crashing to the floor, Abigail's patience snapped. She seized the moment, her voice booming with unfiltered frustration. Do you think breaking things will bring your mother back? Do you think misbehaving will make anyone love you more? Her words cut like glass. The boys froze. Tears welled instantly, spilling down soft cheeks. Their little bodies shook under the weight of a truth they couldn't yet understand. And that was when Pedro walked in. He had returned early from meetings, rain-soaked coat still on his shoulders. The sight before him, his children cowering, Abigail standing over them with fire in her eyes, ignited something primal. "What did you just do to my sons, Abigail?" His roar thundered across the marble floor, the very sound echoing through the grand halls. The twins collapsed into sobs, clinging to each other. Abigail, breathing heavily, turned toward him. For the first time since stepping into this mansion, her iron facade faltered. "I told them the truth," she said, her voice shaking despite her upright stance. "Because nobody else will." Pedro's jaw clenched. The tycoon who could silence boardrooms with a single glance suddenly looked powerless, his fury tangled with disbelief. How dare she wound them like this? How dare she pierce open scars he'd spent years trying to cover with money? Yet something about her defiance held weight. He saw it, not cruelty but conviction. She wasn't trying to break them, she was demanding they face reality. For a long moment, thunder outside matched the storm inside. Pedro's heart pounded as the twins' cries echoed in his chest. His instinct screamed to fire her on the spot, just like the 10 before. And yet, deep inside, a small voice whispered, maybe this woman was the only one strong enough to reach them. Abigail knelt again, eyes glistening now, softer than before. She pulled a trembling Jerry close, then held out her hand for Ben. "I didn't mean to hurt you, but love means telling the truth, even when it stings. I will never lie to you." The twins hiccuped between sobs, unsure whether to hate her or trust her. Pedro stood frozen, torn between rage and reluctant admiration. Pause for a second. If you were standing in Pedro's shoes, would you have fired Abigail right there or given her one more chance? Drop your gut reaction in the comments. And hey, while you're here, don't just watch silently. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. Honestly, it's free, but your support means everything. Without you, these stories can't keep coming. Then back inside the mansion, Pedro exhaled sharply, turning away before his sons could see the storm raging behind his eyes. "Tomorrow," he muttered, voice low but heavy. "We talk. Tonight, put them to bed." And just like that, Abigail's place inside Breaker's mansion was no longer certain, yet far from over. The following morning, the mansion stirred under a pale grey sky. The storm had passed, but its residue lingered, thick in the air. Pedro sat in his study, a half-empty glass of bourbon still resting on his desk from the night before. Sleep had eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard Abigail's words echo, "Do you think breaking things will bring your mother back?" The audacity, the cruelty, and yet the unsettling truth within them. Pedro's business empire had thrived because he could spot deception instantly, cut through noise, and face harsh realities others ignored. But inside his own home, when it came to grief and family, he had chosen silence. He had cocooned his twins inside toys, trips and distractions, hoping pain would dissolve with time. Abigail had shattered that illusion in a single breath. In the kitchen, Abigail prepared breakfast quietly. Her hands moved with precision, but her chest was heavy. She had not come here to make enemies. She had taken the position because she believed these boys deserved consistency, not revolving doors of strangers. But perhaps she had gone too far. Perhaps her directness had burned a bridge beyond repair. Ben and Jerry sat at the long oak table, heads bowed. They poked at pancakes, hardly eating. Abigail set a pitcher of orange juice beside them and said gently, "Eat. You need strength." Jerry whispered, "Daddy's mad at you." Her chest tightened. She crouched down beside them. "I know. But I'm not here to please him. I'm here for you." Ben's eyes searched hers with uncertainty. He wanted to believe her, but after so many goodbyes, hope was dangerous. Upstairs, Pedro watched through the open doorway, torn between dismissing her on the spot or allowing the boys one last chance at stability. His pride screamed for control. His heart wrestled with doubt. Later that afternoon, tension erupted again. Abigail had insisted the twins practice piano. Pedro overheard Jerry protesting, "Mom never made us play this long." Abigail's response was swift. "Your mother gave you love. I will give you discipline. Together that makes you whole." Pedro stormed in, fury spilling over. "Enough, Abigail. You're not their mother. Don't speak of her as if you know what she gave." Abigail straightened, her hands trembling though she kept her voice steady. "I don't claim to replace her, but if you want your sons to grow, someone must speak the words you're too afraid to say." The room froze. Ben's small fingers hovered above the piano keys, eyes wide. Jerry's lip quivered. Pedro's chest burned. He wanted to unleash the full weight of his anger, fire her immediately, reclaim control. But a whisper deep inside whispered something terrifying. What if she was right? Instead, he turned sharply and walked out, slamming the door so hard the chandelier above rattled. That night, Abigail sat awake in her small staff quarters, replaying every exchange. She had never wanted war with her employer, yet truth had left her no choice. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost like a prayer, "Don't give up on me, boys. Don't let him push me away." Meanwhile, Pedro sat on the balcony overlooking the dark Atlantic waves. The salt air stung his lungs. For once, business reports and market charts offered no escape. His twins' fragile faces haunted him. His late wife's memory weighed heavy, and Abigail's fierce conviction sliced through his armor. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO didn't feel in control. He felt lost. And beneath that loss, something dangerous was forming. The seed of reluctant respect. 2 days later, Newport was gripped by an unexpected blackout. Power lines downed by fallen branches left neighborhoods in darkness. Even Breaker's mansion, with its backup systems, struggled. Generators flickered, heat sputtered, and silence swallowed the usually humming estate. For the first time, Pedro could not retreat into his study or drown in work. The Wi-Fi was gone, his phone nearly dead. The empire he controlled so easily from screens slipped out of reach, leaving him grounded in the one place he often avoided, his own home. Abigail lit candles in the grand dining room, their flickering glow softening her sharp features. She gathered blankets, guiding Ben and Jerry to sit close. The boys clung to each other nervously, unused to such stillness without television or bright lights. Their small voices broke the quiet. "Daddy, what if it never comes back?" Jerry whispered. Pedro knelt beside them, awkward but earnest. "It will. Storms pass. Power returns. You're safe here." Abigail watched him carefully. His words held comfort, but his posture betrayed distance, as though he were performing fatherhood rather than living it. She placed mugs of hot cocoa in front of the twins, her touch grounding them in a way Pedro's reassurances could not. Hours dragged on, shadows stretched across marble floors. With nowhere to hide, Pedro found himself at the table beside Abigail, the twins between them. The silence pressed heavy until Abigail broke it. Children need structure, but they also need honesty. Pretending everything is fine only makes fear louder. Pedro bristled. "Are you implying I've lied to them?" Her gaze didn't waver. "You've avoided truth. That's its own kind of lie." The twins looked back and forth, sensing the tension but too weary to intervene. Pedro inhaled slowly, the flickering light catching in his eyes. "You think I haven't suffered enough, that I don't carry guilt every day?" Abigail's voice softened, though her resolve remained. "I think you've carried it alone for too long, and it's crushing them." The room fell silent again, broken only by the steady drip of rain outside. The twins huddled closer, lulled by warmth and exhaustion. One by one, their heads drooped against Abigail's arms. Pedro watched as she instinctively pulled them near, humming softly, a lullaby almost lost to memory. He hadn't heard anyone sing to them since his wife died. His chest tightened. For a fleeting moment, he saw not confrontation, but connection. The candles burned low. Pedro leaned back in his chair, weariness settling over him. He glanced at Abigail, who now held both boys against her shoulders, her face unreadable, yet strangely tender. For the first time, the billionaire CEO wondered, was the unthinkable not her anger, not her defiance, but her willingness to love his sons in a way he no longer knew how? And in that fragile stillness, a shift occurred, not yet trust, not yet forgiveness, but the beginning of something neither of them could deny. The blackout dragged into its second day. By now the mansion had grown quiet in a way Pedro had never known it. No servants bustling, no mechanical hum, no distractions to shield him from silence. For once, all that existed was family. That evening, Pedro walked past the staff quarters. Through a half-open door, he saw Abigail seated on her bed, a worn photograph clutched between her hands. Candlelight illuminated her face, softening the edges he had always perceived as unyielding. He should have turned away. Yet something about the vulnerability in her posture rooted him there. "Is that your family?" he asked finally, his voice low. Abigail startled, quickly folding the photograph as though it were a secret. "It's nothing," she replied, her usual armor snapping back in place. But Pedro didn't move. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Nothing doesn't make you sit like that." Her eyes flickered, torn between defiance and fatigue. At last she sighed and opened the picture again, revealing a young girl standing beside an elderly woman in front of a modest house. "My grandmother. She raised me. My parents left before I could even remember their faces." Pedro stepped into the room slowly. "And the girl?" Abigail looked down at her younger self. "That was me, before I learned people don't always stay." Silence stretched, heavy with memories unsaid. Pedro studied her. "Is that why you were so harsh with Ben and Jerry? Because you don't want them believing in permanence?" Her jaw tightened, but her voice softened. "Because I know what abandonment feels like. It carves holes inside you that no amount of kindness can fill. Discipline doesn't erase pain, but it teaches you how to survive it." For the first time, Pedro saw not a domineering nanny, but a survivor. Someone who had endured storms harsher than most could imagine, and still chose to stand strong. The twins appeared at the doorway then, clutching flashlights. "We couldn't sleep," Ben admitted. Abigail placed the photo aside and beckoned them closer. They climbed onto the bed, curling against her. She pulled the blankets higher, her arms encircling them instinctively. Pedro watched, conflicted, as his sons leaned into a woman they'd known only days, trusting her with a depth they had never shown any of the others. Abigail met his gaze across the room. In her eyes he didn't see defiance this time. He saw a plea. Don't take this away from them. Think about this for a second. Abigail is revealing pieces of her soul, raw, scarred, real. If you've ever watched someone open up despite their pain, you know how rare that is. And listen, if you've made it this far into the story, don't just watch silently. Subscribe now. Because without your support, stories like this, stories that bear humanity, won't survive. Show some love by clicking that button. Back inside the room, Pedro exhaled slowly, his chest heavy. He wanted to resist, to protect the barrier around his heart, but something about Abigail's honesty pressed through cracks he hadn't noticed forming. For the first time, the man who could buy anything felt something money couldn't purchase, the quiet power of truth. And though he would never admit it aloud, Pedro Jacobs was beginning to need Abigail Hill far more than he had ever expected. The blackout ended on the third morning. Light returned, machines hummed again, and the mansion buzzed with renewed order. Yet inside the walls of breakers, something else had shifted. Silence no longer carried only weight. It carried possibility. Pedro found himself lingering near the twins more than usual, watching as Abigail guided them with surprising patience. Her strictness remained, but softened now with humor. She had begun weaving discipline with tenderness, stitching together something the boys had long craved: structure, with love. That afternoon, Abigail organized a scavenger hunt in the gardens. Instead of assigning staff to supervise, she joined the twins herself, racing barefoot across damp grass, laughter spilling from her lips. Ben squealed as he discovered a clue tucked under a rosebush. Jerry tripped and tumbled, only for Abigail to scoop him up, brushing dirt from his knees with a smile. Pedro stood at the balcony, arms crossed, but this time his stern expression masked something he hadn't felt in years: warmth. For so long he had believed joy was buried with his wife. Yet here, watching his sons run free, hearing their laughter ring across the gardens, he realized joy had not died. It had only been waiting. Later, when twilight painted the mansion in golden hues, Abigail sat with the twins in the music room. Instead of demanding scales, she taught them a simple duet, her hands guiding theirs across the keys. Their clumsy notes filled the air with imperfect beauty. When they faltered, she chuckled softly, saying, "Mistakes are proof you're trying." Jerry looked up at her with wide eyes. Nobody ever said that before. Abigail's throat tightened, but she smiled. "Then remember it always." Pedro entered quietly, leaning against the doorway. For once, the sight didn't stir defensiveness. It stirred gratitude. He cleared his throat, startling them all. "That sounded decent," he said, attempting a joke. Ben giggled. "Daddy, you smiled." Pedro blinked, caught off guard. Abigail's lips curled upward, amusement flashing in her eyes. For a moment, the mansion didn't feel like a museum of grief. It felt like a home. That night, they gathered by the fireplace, a rarity Pedro hadn't indulged in since his wife's passing. Abigail roasted marshmallows with the boys, her laughter mingling with theirs. Pedro sat close, the warmth of flames flickering across his face. When Jerry's marshmallow caught fire, he panicked, but Abigail calmly blew it out, teasing, "Sometimes even disasters turn sweet." The twins devoured the charred treat, giggling uncontrollably. Pedro shook his head, chuckling under his breath. The sound surprised even him. When the boys finally drifted to sleep, Abigail tucked them in, brushing stray hair from their foreheads. She lingered, whispering something Pedro couldn't hear. He remained in the hallway, his chest tight, his defenses loosening piece by piece. Later he found her in the kitchen cleaning up. For a long moment he said nothing, simply watching her hum an old tune while stacking dishes. At last, his voice broke the silence. "They haven't laughed like that in years." Abigail glanced up, startled by the gentleness in his tone. "They needed to remember joy exists." His eyes softened. "So did I." Their gazes held, neither daring to speak the rest. In that unspoken moment, walls crumbled just slightly, leaving space for something new, something neither of them could name yet, but both felt stirring beneath the surface. For the first time, Pedro Jacobs allowed himself to believe healing might be possible. And for the first time, Abigail Hill wondered if she had finally found a place where she belonged. The fragile peace of Breaker's mansion lasted only a week before it crumbled. Pedro had traveled to Boston for high-stakes meetings, returning late one evening with exhaustion etched into his face. He expected order, perhaps laughter like before. Instead, he walked into chaos. The twins were screaming, their toys scattered across the marble floor. Abigail stood in the middle, her voice raised, commanding them to stop fighting. "Ben! Jerry, enough!" she snapped, grabbing the tablet Jerry had snatched from his brother. "This behavior ends now." Jerry burst into tears, shouting, "You're mean, you don't care about us." Pedro's chest tightened. He stepped forward just as Jerry blurted the words that cut deepest. "You're worse than Mom being gone." Abigail froze, the insult striking like a dagger. For a moment she looked more wounded than angry, but Pedro heard nothing except the echo of his son's pain. "What did you do to them this time?" His voice thundered through the hall. Abigail turned sharply, her own hurt twisting into fire. "I set boundaries, something you've refused to do since their mother died." The accusations sliced deeper than she intended. Pedro's face hardened, rage boiling. "Don't you dare speak of her, you have no right." Tears pooled in Ben's eyes. He clung to Jerry, whispering, "Stop fighting." But neither adult listened. Pedro stepped closer, towering over Abigail. "You think discipline gives you authority here? You're an employee, nothing more." Her voice cracked, though her stance remained firm. "And yet your children trust me more than they trust you. Maybe because I see them, not as fragile glass, not as burdens, but as boys who need love and limits." The words hung in the air, poisonous and true. Pedro's fury erupted. "Get out of my sight before I make you the 11th nanny gone from this house." The twins gasped, clinging tighter to each other. Abigail's chest heaved, her composure unraveling. She looked at the boys, two frightened children who had finally begun to believe she might stay, and whispered, "I never wanted to hurt you." Then she turned and stormed down the hallway, her footsteps echoing like gunshots against the marble. The silence left behind was unbearable. The twins sobbed into each other's shoulders. Pedro's hands shook, rage mixed with regret, pride tangled with grief. He wanted to chase her, to take the words back, but his ego held him still. Hours later, the mansion felt colder than ever. Abigail's room stood empty, her belongings gone. The twins refused to eat, crying themselves to sleep. Pedro sat alone in his study, bourbon glass untouched. For years he had told himself he was protecting his children from more pain. Tonight, he realized he had delivered it himself. And for the first time, Pedro Jacobs wondered if he had just destroyed the only chance his family had to heal. Breaker's mansion had never felt so cavernous. Its gilded halls seemed hollow, its chandeliers dimmer, its very walls echoing with absence. Abigail's room was empty now, stripped of the few belongings she had carried. The void she left behind was louder than her presence had ever been. Pedro walked those halls like a ghost. He tried burying himself in reports, contracts, endless numbers, but even billion-dollar deals could not silence the memory of her words. "Maybe because I see them." They gnawed at him, unrelenting, until even his wealth felt worthless. Down the hall, Ben and Jerry sat curled together on the rug of their playroom, toys untouched. "She's not coming back," Jerry whispered, tears streaking his cheeks. Ben pressed his forehead against his twin's shoulder. "Everyone leaves." Their voices cut through Pedro's heart like blades. He leaned against the doorway, unseen, unable to step inside. Shame pinned him where he stood. His empire could build skyscrapers, yet he couldn't hold together the two souls who mattered most. Meanwhile, Abigail sat alone in a small Providence cafe, staring out at rain pelting the windows. She had taken a bag, a photograph, and little else when she walked away. The boys' tearful faces haunted her. She stirred her coffee absently, wondering if leaving had been strength or cowardice. Her grandmother's voice echoed in memory. "Love is never easy, Abby. Sometimes it means standing firm. Sometimes it means forgiving." Abigail closed her eyes. She had promised herself never to be broken by anyone's rejection. Yet tonight the hollow in her chest proved otherwise. Against her will, she had grown attached. The twins were no longer just children in her care. They were pieces of her heart. Back in Newport, Pedro sat on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic. Waves crashed against the cliffs, relentless. He thought of his wife, how she had begged him during her final days to stay open, to let love continue for their boys. He had failed her. He had hidden behind his empire, firing nannies when they became inconvenient, keeping grief sealed. Until Abigail. She had been unafraid to challenge him, unafraid to love the boys with both strength and tenderness. She had forced him to confront truths he had buried, and he had repaid her with cruelty. Pedro buried his face in his hands. Pride had always been his fortress, but tonight it felt like a prison. He whispered into the night air, "What have I done?" The mansion clock struck midnight. Ben and Jerry's muffled sobs still carried through the hall. Pedro stood shoulders heavy yet resolute. He could not let history repeat itself. He could not let his children lose another figure who had dared to love them. For the first time in years, Pedro Jacobs chose humility. He grabbed his coat, keys jangling in trembling hands, and walked into the storm. Somewhere across town, Abigail sat motionless, staring at her untouched coffee, her own decision hanging heavy in the air. She didn't know it yet, but their paths were about to collide once more. This time not in fury, but in choice. Rain slicked the streets of Providence as Pedro's car pulled up outside the dim cafe. Through the glass, he saw her, Abigail, sitting alone, shoulders tense, a half-empty cup before her. For a moment, he almost turned back. Billionaire CEOs didn't beg, but fathers did. And tonight, he wasn't the executive commanding skyscrapers. He was a man desperate not to lose what mattered most. He stepped inside, water dripping from his coat, drawing curious glances from patrons. Abigail looked up, startled. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. "Why are you here?" Pedro hesitated, the words sticking like stones in his throat. At last his voice cracked. "Because I was wrong." Silence hung between them, thick as the storm outside. Abigail crossed her arms, fighting back the sting in her eyes. "You told me to leave." "I did. Isn't that what you wanted?" Pedro shook his head, his chest heaving. "No, it's what my pride wanted, not me, not my sons. They cried themselves to sleep, Abigail. They need you. I need you." Her breath caught. She wanted to resist, to hold firm, but the image of Ben and Jerry's tear-streaked faces pierced through her defenses. She whispered, "I never meant to hurt them. Everything I said because I love them." Pedro stepped closer, his voice low, trembling with sincerity. "Then come home, not as a nanny, as family." Her lips parted in shock. She searched his eyes, expecting arrogance, expecting another test. Instead, she found raw honesty. For the first time since meeting him, she saw not the billionaire, not the employer, but the father, the man. Tears blurred her vision. She nodded slowly. "For them, I'll come back." When they returned to Breaker's mansion, the twins rushed forward, arms flinging around Abigail's waist. "You came back," Jerry cried. Ben clung tightly, whispering, "Don't leave again." Abigail's heart swelled as she embraced them, her voice breaking. "Never." Pedro stood behind them, emotion clouding his eyes. He had lost 10 nannies before her, but none had dared to fight for his sons, for him, the way she had. Tonight, he vowed never to let her go. Think about this ending. Abigail's story isn't just about discipline. It's about love that heals even when it arrives in unexpected ways. If you're still watching right now, ask yourself, how many stories have touched you like this, and yet you forgot to subscribe? Don't let this moment pass. Support this channel. Subscribe today because every click means we can keep bringing you powerful, life-changing stories like this one. Back in the mansion, laughter returned, filling halls once heavy with grief. For the first time since his wife's passing, Pedro felt alive again. His sons smiled freely, their eyes brighter, their hearts steadier. And Abigail was no longer just the woman who had been hired to care for them. She was the anchor they had all been searching for. The storm had broken, a family had been reborn. And in the heart of Newport, inside the Breakers' mansion, love, unexpected, unthinkable, undeniable, had finally come home.